Good evening. Welcome to another interview for The Lens. I'm Dr. Vikram Singhal, and with me tonight is Professor Neera Chandhoke, a well-known professor of political science from Delhi University and now a very well-known public intellectual, and more than that, a concerned citizen advocating the concerns of our democracy. And today, on the occasion of the Constitution Day, it's apt that we talk to Madam Chandhoke about our Constitution. More important than its structure is its formulation, its imagination, and the way our people, we as a people, have accepted it or known it. So, to start, welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ma'am, the Indian Constitution, apart from all the thing, it's known to be a lawyer's constitution, it's known to be a very, very strong written text. But the Constitution of India is something more than a text. There are varying kinds of judgments and articulations people make about it. But most importantly, the other day we were thinking that when we talk of ourselves as a democracy, should we call ourselves a democracy or a constitutional democracy?
Oh, absolutely constitutional. Democracy is a very fluid word, a very fluid concept. It's been going, there are about 50 different interpretations of democracy. But above all, what a democracy needs is an enunciation of its objectives.
Exactly.
It needs, and the objectives are very simple: to replace arbitrary decision making with procedures. After having a constitution, the people should be aware that nobody can take arbitrary decisions, as in when the way monarchs used to do it. The decisions have to be taken, important decisions, by the elected representatives of the people. Now, democracy is not new, it goes back to ancient Athens. But in ancient Athens, there was not this conception of channelizing power through processes, through regulations, through accountability. That is the most important part. And without a democracy, the objectives of our democracy are very well spelled out in the preamble. That is the objective of the form of government to secure for its people justice, social, economic, political, liberty, equality, secularism, and socialism. Socialism has kind of dropped out, but these are the most, and fraternity. And these are the most important issues, and we judge a government. We should be judging a government according to the way it succeeds in realizing these objectives.
Exactly, ma'am. So when we say that there are certain paramount values which have been enunciated by the Constitution, be that democracy, be that secularism, be that dignity, be that justice for everyone, equality for everyone. Now, these are perhaps the framework within which the people may identify themselves as a people to act upon the democracy. In the absence of these values, the people would be reduced to a mob.
Absolutely.
And democracy wouldn't function in a mob. Now, when we hear of claims of, say, that socialism and secularism are later additions to the Constitution, or rather the preamble, and that there are values, especially when there are calls for Hindu Rashtra, that the Constitution is not something heaven sent sacrosanct. it must reflect the will of the people. So when we say it must reflect the will of the people, who are the people then?
Yeah, that is, one big myth. That the Constitution, that these were values that were added to the Constitution. If you permit me, a little historical survey would be in order. You see, there are two features about our Constitution which make it sacrosanct. One, it is the product of the freedom struggle. And secondly, that Indians were probably the only post-colonial society who drew up their own constitution. In every other colony, the colonialist gave them a constitution, or at least they had to get it approved by the colonialist. Now, this has a long history. It is the outcome of struggle. Now, 1895 was the first time in the public sphere that you have the presentation, the coming out, the emergence of a Bill of Rights. Nobody knew who had written that document. Annie Besant said it's probably Lokmanya Tilak, but we don't know. But it was at the core of this document, Bill of Rights, was the classic rights of liberalism. Civil liberties, right of life, right of freedom of expression, right not to be arrested without due cause, and so on and so forth. The second step towards constitution making, and this is where secularism comes in very importantly, is 1928, after the Simon Commission and the protests around the Simon Commission. The Secretary of State for India challenged Motilal Nehru, who was then, of course, the leader of the Congress, that show me you can write a constitution which will satisfy both Hindus and Muslims. Sorry, prior to that, 1925, a group of liberals sent a draft constitution to England. The Labour Party was in power. The Labour Party was prepared to introduce a constitution in the parliament, amended form. But in the meantime, it dropped out of power, so that kind of lapsed. So we come to 1928. The Congress Party set up an all-party committee, the leaders of the Congress Party, and they went to the Muslim League. The Muslim League by that time said, no, we want separate electorates, which none of the all-party committee members were prepared to give. So they decided, instead of separate electorate, we will give you minority rights, because foremost in their mind was that people should stay in India and not go to a Pakistan which had already started becoming the use of everyday language. So you have what then became 29 and 30, the rights of minorities to their own culture, their educational institutions, their religious laws, etc. But secularism was never mentioned. But 1931, there were the Karachi riots. And after Karachi riots, the Congress wrote, the leaders of the Congress wrote a very good manifesto on how communalism had emerged in India mainly due to colonial.
The commission formed in the aftermath of the assassination of Vidya Ganeshankar Vidyarthi to investigate the Kanpur riots of 1931, just before the Karachi session.
That's right.
And thereafter, in its 3 months tenure, it went down on to investigate the Varanasi riots. And together, they submitted the report called The Communal Problem. It was published in a book form when Vikram Singhal was there in NVT as the communal problem, or in Sampradayik Samasya or Firkavarana Masla.
It's considered one of the most reliable.
Yes, one of the best reports.
In that session, when discussing the resolution of rights, Gandhi said, we would have liked the Muslims to be a part of it, but since they want to be separate, what is important is the state should be neutral. So here you have the genesis of secularism. This was repeated in the Suffolk Committee report, 1945, and this came up in the Constituent Assembly. Oddly, secularism was never spelled out. They kept talking about secularism, and Nehru would say, you guys don't know what you're talking about, but it was never clarified. In fact, Ambedkar was asked, secularism, socialism. He gave a long reply on socialism, but not on secularism.
I guess this amendment was moved by Mr. Kamath in the Constituent Assembly.
It was.
And then
by
it was, yes.
Quite right. And there was no, it came up in the context of uniform civil code, it came up in the context of personal laws, etc. Now, after that, Nehru goes to Aligarh Muslim University, and the Aligarh Muslim University, in the Aligarh Muslim University, he says, this whole notion of a theocratic state has gone. What we need is that religion shall not be denied, which is a big pump ground for Nehru because he didn't like the idea of religion in politics. Because in Europe, secularism was actually secularization. That is the relegation of religion to the private sphere. You know what you want in your home, but not in the public sphere. And then Nehru wrote an introduction to a book titled Dharam Nirpekshita, in which he said there are three aspects of secularism: freedom, equality, and neutrality of the state. Now, basically, you don't need freedom, equality, but you have in Article 25 freedom of religion.
Right, from 25 to 29.
The most important is state neutrality. But the most definitive and, which is a little, I think, a little odd, because the most definitive statement on secularism came out in the Bombay case after the fall of the Babri Masjid. The seven-member judge, what you call it, the bench, they all issued separate reports, but one thing, it should be Dharam, Dharam Saram. Amjad Malani said, what is secularism? It's a phantom word. Now, Bhikkhu Parikh has pointed out that this whole idea of Sarv Dharam Sambhav is a Hindu idea. He says, Islam and Christianity do not believe in it. They only believe in one path to their God. And Buddhists and Jains don't even have a God. So why are we using a Hindu concept to
define our secularism?
But that is what the court has been defining. Sarv Dharam Sambhav. So, in my earlier writings on secularism, I have suggested that secularism should be derived from Article 14. That is equality. And the idea of equality of individuals should be extended to equality of groups, religious groups. So, secularism is a companion concept of democracy. It is linked to democracy. To violate secularism is to violate democracy.
Well, this very important question, perhaps I think the single most fundamental question looming before us, not only as a nation but also as a civilization, is this question of Article 14 and equality. There is no concept of nation without equality, because nation as a concept is made up of a people who are equal. There is no idea of democracy without equality. There is no idea of secularism without equality. True. There cannot be any justice without equality. True. And there is no fraternity, of course, without equality.
Absolutely.
So this entire gamut of all our predicates, whatever predicates we want to attach with the Indian nationhood or civilization or people or whatever, everything boils down to one single word, that is equality.
That's equality.
And this is the most difficult word in our consciousness, because this is a word which we do not accept. As a people, as a civilization, as a society, as a community, we don't believe in it. Without believing in this fundamental value, we have created a huge superstructure over it. The entire constitutional system, the state system, the political system, the dominant political narratives, though challenged lately, but equality has been the basis of all the political movements and all the political activisms which have taken place at least for more than 100 years now. So, don't you think that the biggest challenge to the constitution, or rather not only the constitution, the entire idea of our nationhood, is reconciling the idea of equality with our Indian patriarchal ethos or thought, whatever we have? How do we take this to the people?
Yeah, well, inequality has many aspects in India, but the one is, of course, class. And there have been, we have since, I think, the beginning of the 20th century, a number of workers' revolts, a number of strikes, a number of peasant revolts. So that is class. That is what we would call a horizontal problem. But then we have what Ambedkar would call institutionalized inequality in the form of caste. You know, it's very, I was teaching, I teach currently at the Indraprastha Institute of Information Technology. We looked up the preamble and we said, how have these concepts been interpreted in the West and how did they diverge in India? Now, Ambedkar moved the idea of fraternity. Now, this is taken from, Adam Smith in the 18th century, the whole idea of imagination and fraternity. That we have imagination and solidarity. Solidarity is a more active concept, but the idea of fraternity. Now, Ambedkar introduces fraternity into the preamble. At the same time, he writes copiously on how, in India, inequality is sanctioned by religious scriptures. It is a big problem. It is a big problem because he pointed out, giving an alternative view of how caste arose in India. It arose in the 4th century, after the birth of BC, before Common Era. Sorry, after Common Era. Ambedkar said that, Manu, in which religion do you have a Manu who denied education to the Dalits? Now, this is probably one of the most difficult issues in India, and this is an issue that governments are not facing because they will give you reservations, but they're not willing to actually attack. Because Ambedkar said you cannot abolish untouchability unless you abolish caste. Now, caste, nobody wants to abolish it. Now, in recent years, caste has become actually reified with the predominant castes asserting their divine right to rule. So, I think this is an issue, and of course, the issue of patriarchy, which is not only India, which is across the world, but which has taken on very deformative aspects in India, I think, because when you merge caste with hierarchy and patriarchy, you have the kind of nonsense that is being dished out to women from the so-called lower castes.
Exactly, madam. So, coming back to this very idea of equality, a society not ready for it, not understanding it, is suddenly presented with the Constitution. It is governed by a set of people with very high legitimacy who have brought it out, and with I believe it was a very, very clever move rather of accommodating Mr. Ambedkar within the sphere of it, which actually helped to provide the legitimacy the Constitution requires. But beyond that, this is also a reason why I feel our community activities, our social systems, our economic system and political system have rather turned dysfunctional, because all our collective endeavors are aimed at somehow circumventing Article 14.
Yes.
And in our efforts to circumvent or rather subvert Article 14, we have all our activities from political to economic to social have become dysfunctional. Wastage.
True.
Creating a huge wastage.
True.
And when we look somewhere towards East Asia, we see that these have shied away or rather refrained from claiming very lofty ideals, some things which they know they cannot practice. Do you think the Indian Constitution has a big gap of practice and between the value professed and the value practiced?
If you look, this absolutely bears out the report of Oxfam, which is presented at the Davos in January, which actually all theorists are now saying, economists, political scientists, India is one of the most unequal societies in the world. Now, if you look at the statistics of that report, with 1% of the people owning 45% of the resources, it shows that the issue, and I think the problem is because the whole problem of inequality has been narrowed down to poverty. Now, poverty can be, I suppose, at some point tackled if given a government concern. But then equality is a much more difficult. It requires redistribution. More importantly, it requires recognition.
Most importantly, ma'am.
We need these two concepts, these values to be at the center of our politics. Instead, we have Brahmanical ideas of religion being spread around. And I was just thinking, you probably know more about this, Vikram. But in the 19th century, when there was a Hindu revival, after Pratna, in the Arya Samaj or in the Brahma Samaj, they went back to the Vedas. They denounced superstition, they denounced ritual, they denounced the priestly class, they denounced the caste system, they even denounced temples. Today, we have the reinsertion of superstition. And we have the reinsertion of temple going. This magnificent temple, you should go. Actually bolstering a predatory priestly class. I don't know what the Brahmins are doing. They're just ripping off particularly poor people, the way they rip them off in the name of religion. Why don't you tackle these issues? Now we actually have a reinsertion of all these values, which were, or rather these abominations, which were denounced by Ram Mohan Roy in the beginning of the 19th century. Suddenly we have all this coming back, in people believing Babas, people believing in sadhus coming into public life. What is happening? It's reinforcing inequality now. What are people in Saffron doing in public life anyway?
But ma'am, our question remains there that the people at large do not understand equality as described or as imagined by the Constitution.
True.
If the people do not understand a particular or do not share an imagination on the most fundamental aspect of the Constitution, how long can a constitution function solely on the legitimacy or the credibility of its founders?
The Constitution is like a moral compass. Basically, it's a moral compass. It is, I can think of, after all, you have the United States with every constitutional precept. They always say we are the oldest constitutional democracy, but being violated. I was just thinking, you think of the culture, people do have their own way of recognizing inequality. Not everyone, but there is a cultural renaissance coming out from Dharavi in Bombay. And the other day, in fact, I rewatched Bombay, Gully Boy. Yes. Because I wanted to understand, the first time I didn't watch it so carefully, I wanted to understand what is the rap music about, and the criticism of divides was very sharp. But unlike Guru Dutt, who also launched a very sharp criticism of the Indian government in 1957 in Piazza, this is, we will also arrive. There is a churning, which unfortunately our lack of freedom of expression today doesn't allow us to even understand. And I have great hope that the new generation is not going to take it.
Here comes
To give you a small story, personal
Yes.
story, I teach one of my classes are BTech students.
Yes.
Information technology. Before teaching Marxism, I showed them this Oxfam report. Then we asked them to give us the titles for their projects for the final exam. Would you believe it? 70% of them is a radical Marxist critique. Gig economy, a radical Marxist critique, alienation, And I said, how did they get so technical? People are trained to just think like a tunnel. It caught their imaginations. And I think what is happening is kids are becoming, but unfortunately, we have such an atmosphere of silence in our country where reaching out to people becomes impossible. I have hopes.
100 years back, more than 100 years back, Allama Iqbal used to say that ये कैसा दस्तूर जवाबंदी है तेरी महफिल में, यहाँ तो बात करने को तरसती है जुबान मेरी. What I'm again coming back to it is, when we have a people whose sense of morality is informed by religion rather than any other secular source of any other secular body informing their moral imagination and ethical imagination. Ambedkar, in his last speech in the Constituent Assembly, had spoken of constitutional morality. He said that we need to develop constitutional morality. Exactly what he was referring to is that people developing in the sense that their morality is informed by the Constitution. But that hasn't happened.
No.
After 80
He admitted
years,
it. It doesn't come naturally, yeah.
Even after 80 years, we see that even the most moral of the people believe that they are moral. Many of the people I believe in the villages, and I know them, they believe that they are moral. And they believe in morality. They do believe in morality, and they believe that they are, and they make very sincere efforts in leading ethical lives. But the problem is that their imagination of ethics, their imagination of morality, does not have space for equality.
I get that.
Their inequality is
seen as natural hierarchy.
Not only natural, ma'am, as moral.
Moral.
As moral. Means a person coming up and a Dalit coming and not entering the temple by his own volition. And people around respecting him for that. That look, he is so devout that he doesn't enter the temple of his own volition. And at the same time, at every level, means the way we imagine gender roles. Perhaps all over the world, the single biggest custodian of morality has been the gender norms and gender practices. Some rightly or wrongly, that is the custodian of a community's moral capital. But the way we imagine inequality there as so very moral. What's a devout wife, or what's the hierarchy, and the way religion and informing morality, and then morality informing behavior and attitudes and values together. How do we secularize the source of information of the ethics of our people, without which the entire constitution becomes meaningless?
Yours is a young generation, and you're obviously very committed, and I'm very, very happy and excited to hear all this from you. There is a parallel. There is an alternative. And I'll just give you one example of how alternatives arise. Do you remember a film by M.S. Satyu called Garam Hawa? Now, in the end, Balraj Sahni is so dismayed. He has to leave a majoritarian India and go to Islamic Pakistan. And then he sees a communist procession and he joins it. There is an alternative, right?
Yeah, his son Farooq Sheikh just walks down.
Farooq Sheikh is his son.
He climbs down and
yeah. And he just stops the Tonga, straightens his cap, joins it. There is a third alternative. I am alarmed at what is happening. See, everybody, Mathura mosque must go, okay? In Mathura, you have ashrams where women who've lost their husbands, we no longer say widow, they are there, living in the most terrible conditions. The older women have to sing bhajans and the younger ones are exploited. Why don't you do something about that? That's happening in Mathura and in Benares. Your priority is taking down a mosque. Does God need a home? Ramu Gandhi, the philosopher, had asked us. God gives us homes. Do we need to give God a home? So I feel somewhere we have regressed. We have regressed considerably because in my youth, these things were not even thought important, the whole issue of temples and masjids, because we were not party people, but we were fellow travelers of the left. And the left could offer alternatives. The left couldn't understand caste. I think that was their biggest issue. They couldn't understand caste. And I think that is where they flopped. And now I don't see the left anywhere. It just disappeared. We need to reinvent a radical imagination where you talk of people's well-being. Instead of talking about the importance of building temples and building mandir. Why are there mandir on the front page of my newspaper? I hardly read a newspaper now. I get so irritated with the kind of reportage. We actually have a ruling class that has taken us back, if not 50, at least 100 years.
Coming back to it now. The Indian Constituent Assembly debated a whole lot of issues. But before coming down to the values, essentially 4 set of values as professed, the liberal values, the leftist values, or the left values, the Gandhian values, and atop of all of this, the modernist values. So we have the 4 set of values which together inform the constitution. All these values, apart from the Gandhian values, of course, they need something especially in a traditional society like we had the Meiji Restoration in Japan, or we had after the Crimean War the steps against serfdom taken in Russia. Something which shakes up the entire structure, either top down or bottom up. I gave both the examples in that sense. Apart from the Gandhian idea of justicing, we have no other system wherein people were ready to give up their privileges. Give up their privileges, traditional privileges, either caste-based, religion-based, gender-based, feudal privileges, all kinds of traditional authority in the Weberian sense, without having a systematic system of giving up of privileges. If we have brought about a constitution which does not recognize privileges, starting from Article 18, how do we come to a society which values privileges, which treasures privileges, honors privileges? How do we stop people from trying to cultivate, protect their privileges and have an egalitarian society in the constitution? It's such paradoxical.
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation I had with a historian friend. I just said that the social reform movement in India in the 19th century, do you think they're akin or parallel to the reformist movement in Europe? He said, no. The reform movement in Europe broke up a church, it broke down its privileges, divided divided Christianity, and struck at the root of people's knowledge.
Yes.
Our 19th century, we had the unhappy experience of bringing religion into the public sphere. Europe, they took religion out of the public sphere. In India, we brought religion into the public sphere, partly in an attempt to reform it. But they didn't question the caste system. They didn't question the caste system. They wanted to reform it.
Yes, exactly.
It was Ambedkar who said, how can you reform the caste system? It's not like children, women not being allowed to get married after their husbands die. This is a structural issue. But I don't even know if our freedom struggle understood caste. It took Ambedkar to walk out of Hinduism for them to understand caste. Yes, they were against untouchability. Gandhi was very, very against it. But
Gandhi at least had this idea of trusteeship within which he was talking about people giving up their privileges.
He was.
Apart from that, and that to a very later concept, the entire 19th century social reforms and the constitution, we have no idea of denying privileges or people giving up of their privileges. Without this, when we come to this system of protecting, because privileges are a source of entitlement of rent.
Absolutely.
And
The
rent,
frontier class, what we used to call
yes. Privileges are basically something that enables rent seeking.
the old zamindari system.
That's where privileges lie. It entitles you to a rent. And in a society which values rent, it never values labor. Until today, the biggest economic disability which our constitution has not been able to address is the lack of dignity of labor, which has become the biggest disability. People say that we haven't entered the production phase and we moved on to the tertiary sector from the primary sector. We never became an industrial because production, because work, because labor has never been accorded the dignity it deserves. In its absence, we are standing in front of a great dysfunctionality. A dysfunctionality of our constitution, a dysfunctionality of our entire social endeavors. Now, coming back to it, when we are talking about East Asia and other examples, if we cannot do what we say, can we not say what we do? Don't you think that the current backlash of the elite, of the upper caste elite, which has come in the form of this phenomena or this juggernaut riding on parochial values of caste and religion and whatever, nationalism or jingoism or whatever we call it. It is an attempt by the people to reclaim their right to say things that they do and repudiate the high, lofty ideals which some of their leaders had foisted on them.
I absolutely agree because I've grown up in post-independence India, born after independence. And I have never heard this vocabulary in the public domain, what I hear today. Nobody. I mean, there were prejudices. I'm from Punjab and there were prejudices. But there was never this open thing. My suggestion is, A, the Constitution is not an administrative document. It is a vision document. It gives you a framework, right? You have to fill that in with healthy practices. Unfortunately, our political class has become even more callous and cynical and corrupt than it was. Year by year, we see this nonsense. And there's no one to check them. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has also let us down. I mean, our last resort...
It is abdicated.
Absolutely.
Our
last resort
yes.
Our last hope has gone. Secondly, I would suggest to fill in the Constitution. We need a cultural renaissance.
Exactly.
And I have great hope in young people. You look at the anti-CAA movement. They suddenly arose at a time when none of us were expecting what is going to happen to this law. It's just going to ride roughshod because the opposition is not there, and suddenly we see young people on the streets. And when I saw in February in that very freezing rain, 10,000 Delhi University students marching with a flag in one hand and the Constitution in the other, I actually wept. I said, we have done something right then because our students are teaching them. It was so brave. And they have paid for it. There are 4 people still in jail, right? They have paid for it. This is a new phenomenon all over the world that you imprison students. Otherwise, nobody ever imprisons their young people. Farmers' movement, I have mixed feelings because they were not talking of the country, they were talking about themselves. But the CAA showed you a spirit which was lacking, and that was solidarity. They were not marching for themselves, they were marching for their fellow citizens. Now, they could do it from across India, and come to Shaheen Bagh and sit with those women and say, hum honge kamyab. I just felt it was a moment of drama.
I'll quote you, ma'am.
You can.
You say, and I agree, you say that if we call ourselves a nation, the least we have is that we owe each other justice.
You see, you form a political community when you have a constitution. Today it's Constitution Day.
Yes.
The political community does 2 things. It establishes a relationship between the government and the people. Or the state is an abstraction. Secondly, it establishes a relationship between people who were strangers to each other.
Yes.
Right? They wouldn't talk to each other language, etc., etc. And who were the segment of society really fought for fraternity? It was a progressive writers' movement. Sahil Gandhi, Majnu Sultanpuri, Faiz Ahmad Faiz. They were the people who were giving us. I still remember very movingly, there was a film, I saw this film much later. I was a small child those days. In 1961, called Dharmputra. Shashi Kapoor's first film. And in that, he grows up in a Hindu family, and he's a pakka fundamentalist, he doesn't realize. And then he realizes he comes to know he's actually from a Muslim background. And he suddenly, enlightenment comes to him, and they show, and he remembers scenes of the partition, and Sahil Vidhanvi saying, "Ye kiska lahu hai, kaun mara?" Now, if you say kiska lahu hai, kaun mara, you're immediately establishing solidarity and fraternity. Or what did ye kaun mara, kaun thai? In a way, these were these progressive writers who launched a critique of the state. There's a Majnu Sultanpuri, Bombay Meri Jaan, that song. It was the biggest, harshest critique of society and of the state. And then I was looking today at other poets, and they gave us the most marvelous, but today also you have that poetry. Only we don't know of it so much because things are a little uncomfortable. But this is the cultural renaissance we need. We need somebody to say, "Tu Hindu banega na Muslim banega." This is again science. You need that. You need young people to get into theatre. You need young people to get into films. I was telling my daughter, we're all at LAD Shriram College. I also taught in LSR before I went to the university. I said, what are these programs they're putting up on Netflix? These are all LSR girls who in Bombay have become part of Bollywood, but as technical people, I said, what is this dining with Kapoors? I saw 5 minutes, I put it off. And why? Something called the royals. Why are you privilege again? Why are you celebrating royalty? I'm quite shocked. But in a way, those kids are well-intentioned. But somebody has to show them the way. Films have to be there. But Bollywood has also reneged. When was the last film that made you think? I asked Javed Akhtar once, I said, 50s, 60s you had, I just met him casually at some get together. And I said, what happened in the 70s? वो तो आपकी decade थी. He said, माहौल ही कुछ ऐसा था. Emergency हो गई थी, you know. So in a way, this critique against the state becomes a Amitabh Bachchan fighting for his family. He never fought for anybody else. He maybe fought for the coolies or something, but never the kind of critique that we show. And these people today, when you hear them, you say they had imagination of a country where people had obligations to each other.
Yes, ma'am.
ये ना कहीं पर कोई मरा, आपका दिल तो टूटना चाहिए ना. कौन? Why is this happening?
So now, if we come back to this little point, where you that solidarity and people having some obligation for that unknown other, fellow citizen. So, ma'am, when we stand and look up to our dominant class today, the elite or the ruling class, or whatever we call them, or the caste, suddenly we are upfront against a people which believes that the Indian constitutional system, the Indian nation project, proved to be disadvantageous to them. They lost out on their privileges. They want to resecure it. Now, this gives them a sense of justification also, trying to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Looking at the situation or at the crossroads that we are today, does the Indian Constitution have any provision that we may assure or reassure the elite that it need not act predatorily to secure itself?
You remember Ambedkar's last speech on the 26th of, he said a constitution is what its people make it out to be. It is what its people make it out to be. I mean, if you have people who don't regard it as a vision document, as something that is your moral compass, and see it in purely instrumental terms, you are going to have a collapse. That is why today the mode of eroding democracy is not military coup. The mode of eroding democracy is you keep the democratic institution and erode it from inside. Pack it with your own people. That is what they call now authoritarianism. It's not army coup. It is actually a coup by your elected representatives to empty out every system, every institution.
Exactly.
And pose it as it's still formally democratic. The We Democracy report, which comes out from University of Gothenburg, had predicted India is going to become a complete autocracy. This was before the general elections. I think the results of the general election saved us. So we are partly democratic. But we've not transited as yet to a complete autocracy. I think it's a very good index. I mean, the ruling class doesn't take it seriously. But the point of this is a very good index of what is happening. People did vote against in considerable numbers. I don't know what happened at the state level. Maybe we don't know. But in a way, we are not fully democratic any longer. And the state of our Supreme Court is indication of this. The state of our media is indication of this. The absence of... Can you imagine kids protesting against pollution and being rounded up and detained? But has this ever happened? We were always marching. I still remember marching against everything. Jantar Mantar used to be full of people with banners and flags.
One last question. The Indian Constitution, how does it imagine the relation and the manifestation of our republic? Does it look at it as a cooperative, progressive cooperation between the classes and communities, or is a conflict between the classes and communities? How does it imagine our country to progress?
Given the state of inequality in India, which has probably worsened because the wealthy have become more wealthy, I would imagine for something like Nehru, it would be conflict. But there were a lot of conservative people also in the Constituent Assembly.
No, I'm saying this because the dominant question or the dominant phrase over the last 10 years, which I believe the RSS has been successful in inculcating, is not inculcating, rather injecting in our discourse, has been samajik samarasta, the
What
word.
does that mean?
The RSS claims that we must social homogeneity, samarasta. Now, samarasta is very different from samajik samanta or equality.
It's not Samantha, no.
They want samarasta. Yes, ma'am?
Does it mean cooperation?
Yes, ma'am. Now, that is why I'm saying that how does our constitution imagine because the constitution, the framers of the constitutions were very much aware of the inequities and the inequalities prevalent in the society. How did they imagine them to interact? How did they imagine these communities to interact with each other, and how does the country progress from there? Through a conflict of classes in the Marxian sense, by which people demand for their due, their share redistribution, and there is a collective bargaining and a constant struggle in which the classes gradually are able to get their due, or through a cooperative system wherein the communities and the classes cooperate with each other.
That was the Gandhian idea.
That was a Gandhian idea.
Yeah.
So how does the
How did
constitution
it
look
come
at
up?
it?
Yeah, I personally don't think Nehru believed in it. He certainly was more of a socialist, democratic socialist than a Marxist.
Because in this question lies much of what we can do in future.
I don't even know whether they thought about it. They did think of the state. You talked about the nation. We don't know. Nation is a very recent invention, 18th century, 19th century.
Post-Westphalian.
Italian and French.
French.
And we followed the Italian model. And there was this famous statesman who said, we have made Italy, now we have to make Italians. So one language, one curriculum, and conscription. I think they followed that model. The state will be at the center of creating a nation. And we were right out of the partition. You had to create a nation. The state as a modernizing impulse, frankly, was very strange to a number of Indians, to a majority of Indians probably, because they spoke in the vernacular, and I don't know, you'll know better, but this romanticization of the village, and I agree with Ambedkar there also. It's a cesspool. He said it's a cesspool of caste and community. So maybe Nehru at least believed in the modernization of India through the state. But the state has been used for accumulation of personal power instead of doing something for the people. All that they're really building in roads.
That's again the issue, ma'am, that when we look at it, the Nehruvian or the Ambedkarian idea of acting through the state. But the state is nothing but it is an abstraction.
It is an abstraction. You need to talk about the government.
It's the community and the people who have the real existence until and unless they take it upon themselves. The way Gandhi said that, yes, we could talk of anything, but it's the people, it's the community, it's the people who are going to act. And it's for them who things have to act. So, how can a constitution?
I am myself, as I said, except for my faith in the youth, I think we've become an extremely vulgar society. And this whole notion of India being spiritual, Indians have proved to be the most materialistic the most vulgar in a very vulgar fashion. This obsession with brands, modernization has come to us in completely wrong ways. And I just don't know what to. You just turn your back on this kind of vulgarity. But this is a part. I'm surprised by how many of so-called lower class young people, women who are domestic workers, their children, or women who are medical attendants, they want to become models. They want to become, they want to look like Aishwarya or whoever the latest film actress is. I don't know where we've gone. And in a way, the absence of a concrete political program to mobilize the masses has led to this individuation rather than the coming together of a nation.
Exactly.
That is true. Everybody wants a huge car. I can't understand why people want huge cars. I think have a traffic jam outside our lane every day.
Everyone has been left to fend for himself.
It's absolutely vulgar.
The state hasn't reassured anyone.
I mean, most of us stay away from this vulgarity, but why haven't we been able to adopt the positive aspects of modernity, replacing superstition by reason, by care, by, fraternity? I think that is a failure, and I again look to the young people. If they are not headed for the United States now, I think Trump might have dissuaded them. Fight for you. But it is actually true that in universities, find also young people, find a lot of young, very enthusiastic people who are not concerned about their fellow citizens. It's different in our time, we were the products of the freedom struggle, at least our parents were. Up to we need good teachers, but where do we have those inspiring teachers of what it needs? It's too big an issue. And I wish you well in your today's the Constitution Day. It's a day of rejoicing. India adopted a constitution independently written by the Indians. But constitutions cannot answer every question. Yeah.
Thanks, ma'am. At this note, we thank you again for joining us.